Hello ladies and gentlemen, the Fuzz is here, and in today's video, I've compiled a list of what I think are the top 5 worst cards in every aspect. And then after that, I'm gonna do a list from those, the worst of the worst. Now, these are all my opinions, and in some of these aspects, choosing 5 wasn't even that easy because none of the cards were really even that bad, but we had to choose something. So let's jump right into it. We're gonna start with Order. Coming in at number 5 as the worst Order card is Angelic Song. And this card basically only really does anything in stall decks, but outside of that, if you play it, okay, you buy yourself a turn, but then nothing happens. I don't really like cards like this in general. Now, this card is still probably a cut above the rest of the bad cards in Order, but it just doesn't really do much by itself. Unless, of course, you're stalling, but shame on you if you're playing a stall deck. Those decks are not fun. But the main reason this card often fails is just because if it gets hit by a unicorn, your defense just falls apart. So it's not even reliable. If it couldn't be destroyed, or if it was like a spell that said, okay, you take no damage until the end of like your turn, or the end of your opponent's turn, that would actually be a reasonably good card. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Coming in at number 4 is Heavy Infantry. The Order 2-drop, or one of them at least. 2-3, look at those stats. You'd think that would be really good, but unfortunately, that 1 speed makes it really hard to use those stats. And all he really ends up being able to kill is just zombie legionnaires. But against other 2-drops, they just ignore him, because he can't catch up to anything, which is a real shame because the card looks really cool. It's supposed to be beefy, but because it's slow, you can't really use it. You can't block, you can't defend yourself, and you can't try to board control. I kind of wish this card was a little bit improved, but I'm not sure how without overpowering it. You can't just give it 2 speed. That'd be kind of insane. That would make Order's 2-drops ridiculous because that would kill almost all other 2-drops. Maybe if he was like had Vigilance, where he gets the extra speed only on your opponent's turn, so he could block, but then he wouldn't be good at attacking. But then the Vigilance would have to only give him 1 speed, so that he's not like a 2-3 with 3 speed. That would be insane. Yeah, maybe something like that. Oh well. But coming in at number 3, we have Night Recruiter. This little fellow doesn't even seem that bad, but the thing is, you have to have a really large group of soldiers in the front line for it to be really good. And what sucks is that they have to be on the front line with him, so they're very susceptible to just AoE removal or just being attacked in general because he only has 2 speed, so he can't really protect your stuff. If he had 3 speed, he might actually be really good because then he could reliably protect your stuff. If you had a couple Militia on the board, he becomes a 4-4 or a 5-5. He just protects them. But unfortunately, that isn't the case. I mean, even if the soldiers were a really strong theme, would you run this guy? Probably not. There's just better soldiers. Yeah, probably wouldn't use him, because you need to have a big board of soldiers for him to be good, and if you don't, he's just dreadful. But if you really have a big board of soldiers, you're probably winning already. Sorry, Recruiter. If he was a soldier himself, that actually would make him pretty decent, because then he would have all these soldier synergies, he'd be a target for Tactician, and he would power up other recruiters as well. But unfortunately, that is not the case. Coming in at number 2 for Order is War Fanfares. +1/+1 to everything seems really good, but it's kind of expensive. It's 3 mana, and it's not instant, which is a shame. For this to be even decent, you gotta hit like a lot of creatures. But most of the time, Master Tactician will do the same, and more, because it's a 3/3 body itself. This card just seems a little bit too win more for my flavors. You have to hit at least 3 things with it for it to be even remotely decent. If you just hit 2, well, then you can compare to Word of Vigor, except Word of Vigor just crushes this card every day of the week. Even in a soldier-themed deck where you run a lot of guys, I'm not sure I'd want to use this, because it's just dead in the hand until you can really use it. It's kind of like the Hermelian hero power. We need to build up a board, but Hermelian can do a lot with even a small board. This is just not good enough. And the worst Order card is, no surprise, Militia, the good old 1 mana 1/1 with 1 speed, could hardly even be called a card. Now that Alexa summons these dudes for 1 mana, this card could not even be a card. Yeah, the effect is cool, but mostly meaningless, because unless you draw like 3 of these in your opening hand, and you drop them all, then this card is just pretty much useless. It's complete cannon fodder. Doesn't do enough on the board, gets killed by everything, and if you want to use it as fodder for like some Dominion-based abilities, well, your hero power spawns these guys for 1 mana, so sorry, Militia. Looks like you're going to be fired from the guard. Now, we're going to move on to the Wisdom cards. Force Field. Force Field isn't even that bad of a card. In fact, of all the aspects where I had to choose, I found the Wisdom cards to be probably the least bad in general. So, even though the number 1 on this list isn't even that terrible. But anyways, I had to pick something, right? So Force Field gets the pick, and Force Field, you know, is a fairly decent effect if it sticks. But the thing is, if it gets killed by a unicorn or something, it's just really bad because you spent 4 mana and they spent 2 and they removed it and they developed a creature. But even if it does stick, then all it really does is just protect your board a little bit from some board wipes. And that's pretty neat, I guess, but there's just much more powerful spells that you would want to stick, like Chalice. Well, that's an artifact, but you know what I'm saying. Lamp of Zephyr, Electrostatic Storm, Thalmic Reflector. There are just many more valuable things than this that you could try to get to stick on the board. Your opponent might even just ignore it and just let it run its course. Slow down his attacks a little bit. Cool effect. It'd be really neat if it couldn't be destroyed, but at the same time couldn't gain energy, so you couldn't just abuse it. That would be really fun, but as it is, it's just not that great. Coming in at number 4, we have the Golem. Basically, it's a 2/2 with 2 speed as a 2-drop, which is not very good. Most 2-drops are better than this. Now, admittedly, because it is 2 levels and 1 mana, it's a little bit better, since it doesn't die to Bloodwitch Harpy, and it does cost 1 mana. So once you get to 2 aspects, you could play him alongside other stuff. So it's not even like a horrible card, but again, the Wisdom choices in general weren't even that bad. It's just, I don't know, the fact that it's an artifact and a creature means it gets killed by both types of removal, which is a real shame. Your opponent might even just play Unicorn just to pop this, because hey, you just got a card for free. Not a terrible card, but it's just not really the kind of 2-drop you want to run. Spectral Aurite takes the 3rd place here. Looks like a really cool creature, but it's just too much mana. 4 mana for what is basically a flying library guards without the card draw. The effect that it gains, the extra attack from energy, that's pretty cool. But the thing is, if you do play it on turn 5, then it's just very susceptible to removal. And you have to put more work into it to make it good. You have to have a Force Wielder on the board or something. So it was designed for the energy team, but even there, it's not even that great, even though it could serve as a reliable finisher. But if you have extra energy to burn, and you're trying to abuse it, would you rather use this, or would you rather use Foundry Engineers and overwhelm the board with just infinite numbers of golems? I know exactly what I would choose. And the fact that he has 3 health means he dies to Fireball and Zash's Fire Blast thing. The Firestorm, I mean. And it's just not hard to remove in general. Coming in at number 2, the Frost Elemental. Again, this is not the worst creature in the game. The freezing is actually pretty decent, but the mana cost and aspect distribution is kind of bad. 1 and 3 is much worse than 2 and 2, and you never want to start blue, so you're never going to play him on turn 3, and even if you could, you wouldn't, because what are you going to freeze early on? I mean, most early game is like 2 health. So this is just not that good. Most of the time, Flash Freeze will be just as good, if not better, because it actually does damage. So it can immediately kill a 1-health creature and freeze something else late game for 1 mana to set up for an easy removal. So Mr. Frost Elemental just is inferior. Not even such a horrible card, because he does synergize with Flash Freeze, or with really any ways to deal damage. But 3 mana may be a little bit too much for this kind of creature. If it was a 2/2, you know, 2 speed, 2 aspect, 2 mana, or it had 1 extra speed, maybe. Although even then, it probably wouldn't be run. And now the worst the worst wisdom card, we have the Grand Institute. Basically, it's a wisdom shrine that doesn't draw you a card. More or less. Well, you could think of it as a wisdom shrine that you play for a level, but then you have the option to kind of convert it into mana instead. I mean, you would play it for the mana always, because then you then have the option to convert that extra mana into an aspect. So I guess it has some usability, but it is, you know, a skill, and so it takes up one of your skill slots, of which you only have 2 extras, and there are many, many better skills you can pick than this. Sorry, Mr. Institute, I'm afraid no one's going to be attending this semester. Now, we move on to the nature cards, and I think these are my favorites, because I think these have some of the worst cards out there. Without further ado, Test of Time. Basically, it's a worse version of Unicorn. The fact that it's an instant spell means very little, because almost never you need to immediately remove a spell that is played. Like a Charging Lamp of Zephyr, maybe is one example, but that's very, very fringe. You would run a Unicorn any day of the week, not only because it's a creature, and actually a decent creature at that, but also it's searchable via Call of Jalaya, whereas this isn't. If this card drew you a card after you played it, it would actually be reasonably good. Like, it would legitimately be playable. But unfortunately, it's just a worse version of another card. What a shame. Coming in at number 4, we have the Electric Aurite. A card which could be really good if only the effect wasn't so dreadful. It's a 2-drop, but it's a 1/1 with 2 speed. The effect lets you gain an extra 2 attack for 1 combat. Now, much like the Sunchaser Aurite, this can kind of be abused. If you play it, use the ability, and then don't actually go into combat, it will keep the extra attack until a combat actually happens. But then in that case, it's just a, what's it called? The Vampire Aristocrat, Spoiled Aristocrat, for 1 more mana. That only keeps the attack for one turn, so it's just weak. Yeah, you could give it like 10 energy and it attacks for 20 damage, but that's like never gonna happen. It's just too easy to kill in general. It, at most, just trades with other 2-drops, but it's worse than an Elven Warrior in almost every conceivable way. Coming in at number 3, the Wasp Swarm. Now we're getting into the really bad cards. So, move all creatures to the support line. How would you actually use this? Well, you use it to clear your opponent's front line of creatures. Yes, yours go to the support line, but you can just move them right back, and then you attack. And then it's like you just prevented all of his blockers for 1 turn. That's pretty decent, I guess, but the thing is, you have to have a really big board for this to even matter. And this does nothing against flying creatures at all. The one nice thing is that any creatures you move to the support line next turn will not be able to attack you except for Swift. The spell is actually interesting, but it's just too much mana. For 3, I think you could do better than Wasp Swarm. If it costs 2, maybe it'd be a consideration. At 3, no chance. Coming in at number 2, the Primordial Treant. Really cool looking card, turns out to be quite awful. Putting elves under the Treant to make it much, much bigger makes no sense at all, because most elves have at least around 2 attack. So for every elf you put under it to power up the Treant, you're losing that much board control. So why would you want to do that? If you put 3 elves under it to make it a 9/9, well then you just have 1 creature on the board instead of 4. And it has 1 speed, so it's just easy enough to block. This card actually used to be alright because it had Unstoppable, but it only got 1 counter. Still, because it had Unstoppable, it let you kind of combine all your powers into 1 really big creature. But even that wasn't very good. But this is just a worse version. It doesn't matter how big it is if it doesn't have Unstoppable. And with 1 speed, your opponent can just block it with anything. Something as simple as a Assassin or a Temptress of Deceit will just kill it, which is a pretty bad deal. And your opponent might even let it live because, well, it's keeping all these other elves from doing anything. So, no, the card is just awful. And if you play it without the effect, it's a 3/3 with 1 speed. That's pretty dreadful. Don't do that. And the worst nature card, by far, is Vegetation Blockade. All I can say about this card is if this cost a little bit less mana, if you could play it one turn earlier, it might actually not be awful. You're basically paying 2 mana to deny your opponent 2 mana, which sounds pretty awful, and it is. And this used to cost 3 mana, by the way, which made it the worst card in the history of card games. But at 2 mana, it is a little bit better. The idea is you play this, and then your opponent can't play a creature because it costs 2 more. But if he can't play a creature, then you just lose it for free. Because it is 2 and 2 in cost, you can't play it until turn 3. And by then your opponent is likely to have enough mana that he can actually overpower the blockade. If this was playable one turn earlier, if you could play it on turn 2, it might be interesting because you play it and then your opponent can't play anything. Then if you could play a second blockade, then all of a sudden he just cannot play creatures for like the next 3 turns. That's pretty cool because he's not going to be able to destroy these because most of the time you need a non-power engineer or a unicorn. And guess what? Those things are creatures. So that would be interesting, but as it is, it's too slow, way too slow. Every turn you don't play Vegetation Blockade, it gets worse and worse and worse because your opponent will have more mana and will be much more able to just get rid of it for free. Because once your opponent plays a creature, you just lose this. It's not like Jungle Death Trap where the creature is killed alongside with it. It'd be overpowered if it was. But nah, sorry Vegetation Blockade, you cost way too much mana. If this cost 1 mana in one aspect, it'd be pretty cool. You could actually try to make a deck around it, where you try to draw into it early, you play it turn 1, and your opponent can't play anything for like a while, and then you just start dropping creatures and create this tempo advantage and just start swinging face. That would be interesting, but as it is, the card is basically useless. Now, we move on to Rage. Coming in at number 5 for Rage, the Shaman Fire Dancer. It's one of the Shamans. Basically, it's a library guard without card draw, and with slightly worse stats. So, yeah, not very inspired. It is a Shaman, though, but it's not good enough to justify running Shamans. It's the least bad because it's at least somewhat of a dangerous creature. Because it has 3 speed and 3 attack, it could be dangerous, or it could at least trade with a Howliri Rider or something. That's why it's the least bad of the bunch. But coming in at number 4, Spirits Walker, another Shaman. This one's not good either. The problem is, it's a 1/1, so it's very easy to remove. Now, this one does occasionally win games if your opponent plays this, and then he just removes everything you play, and then this gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Then, yeah, it sometimes is ridiculous, but that's very rare. And as a 1/1, it's just really easy pickings, because it only gains the extra attack when it's attacking the hero. So any elf can just kill this. So no, it's another bad Shaman. Man, Shamans need a break. This guy's not it. Orc Javelineer comes in at number 3. It looks like a decent body, 3/4 with range. That's pretty strong, but 1 speed means it just gets ignored. Literally just gets ignored completely. Just like a zombie giant would, but a zombie giant is more dangerous because of more attack and health. This guy's more difficult to actually kill by mobbing it up, because the ranged means it'll kill the first small creature, and then it's a little bit more difficult. But still, it's just not enough of a threat, because anything with 1 speed often has to compensate by having very large stats, and this one just doesn't. Compare this to the Ghoul, which is a 3/4 with 2 speed. So much better. 1 speed is just really sad to have, and there's no way to speed this up really outside of Cavalry Field Captain, but you're not going to run this just so you can use it with Cavalry Field Captain. Looks like the Orcs are not bringing home the gold this time. Coming in at number 2, we've got Boiling Blood. Now, this card used to cost 1 mana, and it was actually alright. At 2 mana, it's just a little bit too slow. Because it doesn't give health, usually you put it on a creature, and then you'll just trade with something, and then it's kind of a 2-for-1. Not very good. Rage decks have many better options than this. About the only use for this card is to put it on Thea, in which case you can actually kill some stuff pretty well. But outside of that, it's just a bad card. Even though it seems much cheaper compared to the Angelic Might. Angelic Might gives you 2 health, so you can actually kill something and then survive and then actually get good value. But this, you don't kill anything for free, you just trade. So it's almost always 2-for-1 in your opponent's favor, and that's not what you want to be doing with your cards. Coming in at number 1, Detonate. You know how I said Test of Time is basically a worse version of Unicorn? Well, Detonate's basically a worse version of Test of Time. So this is a worse version of a card that's already a worse version of another card. Yeah, I don't know. Much like Test of Time, if this card... Oh, sorry. If this card drew you a card after playing it, it would be, like, passable. Or some have suggested that it should do 2 damage as well. But I don't know about that. If it could do 2 damage to something, like not just face, it might be okay. But I would much rather it drew a card. As it is, you have absolutely no reason to put this card into your deck, period. So now we're done with Rage. We move on to Minion. And coming in at number 5 in Minion, Power Surge. Well, this is basically like a Moon Priestess, but it's permanent. But it's not a creature. There's not much use for this card. It seems like it's another New Horizons, but it's actually a lot worse. Because New Horizons gives you an aspect, an action, which normally does not give you a card draw. When you get a mana crystal, you get a card draw. So this is like you're playing an extra shrine for mana, but you don't get the card draw. So you miss out on a card by playing this. This is number 5 though, because compared to some of the other cards on the list, it's actually playable to try to accelerate your mana. But Moon Priestess is almost always better because it activates Spoiled Aristocrats, because it's a creature, it synergizes with a lot of things, including things like Devious Plot, if you were ever to run that. It's just better. It's just a lot better than this poor card. Oh well. Power Surge, ladies and gentlemen. In stores now. 100% discount because nobody's gonna buy it. Coming in at number 4, Blood-Seeking Mutant. This is an example of a really cool idea, kind of executed poorly. This creature is simply too expensive for the rather small body. Yes, if it stays on the support row, it can actually do a lot of damage because it'll just pick off your opponent's stuff. The problem is that once it runs out of targets, it just sends itself back to the hand, which seems really, really counterproductive. So how are you going to play it? I mean, you're going to play when there's a big board? Well, if there's enough of a board, then your opponent won't care about a weakness emblem once per turn. He'll probably just overpower you anyways. I'm speaking from experience because I've seen this played against me in trials a lot. And most of the time, either I remove it immediately, or I just ignore it because the 1 extra emblem per turn isn't enough because you spent your entire turn doing nothing, basically. And then I just play a big creature and then I just keep swinging face. So Mr. Mutant just unfortunately isn't good enough. As a start, he should not have to do this. He should not have to put a counter so that if there's no targets, he just stays on the board. And even then, he wouldn't be playable. But at least it would be really cool and interesting. And that's what we want. We want cards to be cool and interesting, even if they're not good. Power Spike Armor comes in at number 3. It's another implant. It's the worst of the bunch because it only gives +1/1. Unblockable is pretty cool, but you have to consider that because you get weakness emblems every time at the start of turn, you power up a creature by 1/1, and then next turn you just lose the buff. So you haven't really accomplished a whole lot. And the creature will continue to get weaker, actually. So this is a very weak implant. Just compared to Overcharger, which gives +3/3 and Unstoppable, it's not even in the same universe in terms of power level. There's no reason to even consider running this card. +1/1 is just not enough. Even though it does help you kill a creature, you'll eventually end up killing your own creature with this. Implants need to give you a good power boost to compensate for the fact that the creature gets weaker and weaker and weaker. +1/1 is just not good enough. Coming in at number 2, the Power Seeker. Oh man, what a cool card, but unfortunately it's bad. 1 health means it's just way too vulnerable to getting killed. Yes, occasionally it can kill your opponent if you can't kill it, and then you just power up to 10. That's hilarious, but that's very rare. What I wish this card would be something like a 0/3 with 3 speed, but then only gains attack when you power it up. In that case, it's not as vulnerable. And maybe you could even make it cost 3 mana then. You could put it on the board, it'd be a lot tougher to kill, and then it could actually trade reasonably well with stuff. But it also wouldn't be so stupidly ridiculous where if it doesn't get removed, it's like, oh, well, it's going to be an 11/12 that's impossible to remove. I don't know. The whole turn mana into temporary power just doesn't work out because as soon as it's your opponent's turn, oh, is that 1 health? Oh, look at that, Disciple of Zash, and it's dead immediately. too easy to kill, and trying to save mana every turn for this guy just to be able to block or something, it's just not a very efficient way to spend your mana. So Mr. Power Seeker is going to have to look for power somewhere else because he's not going to find it in anybody's constructed deck, that's for sure. And the worst Dominion card, by far, Word of Power, the worst of the word cards. So what does this do? Well, you sacrifice a mana crystal and then you gain 1 mana for each of your Dominion levels. Okay, that looks pretty cool. Oh, and then you draw a card, you redraw it. It's the only word card that costs 1 mana. If only that actually helped it. So let's look at it. If you have only 1 Dominion aspect and you play it, you lose a mana crystal and then you gain the mana right back. So you just completely broke even, except you drew a card for 0 mana. Well, you spend this and drew a card, but then you have one less mana for next level. Well, that's completely pointless. If you're to play it with 2 Dominion levels, okay, let's say 2 Dominion levels on 2 mana, well, you actually gain 1 mana. You could get a slightly bigger creature out on the turn, but unfortunately, you're going to be 1 mana behind the next turn. So your next turn is going to be a lot worse. Ugh, that's not even that good. If you have 3 Dominion aspects, and let's say 3 and then 2 mana, you could actually play something like a Thunderstorm Titan on 2 mana. That sounds pretty cool. Except that why in the world would you have 3 Dominion levels? There's no reason to do that. Not only that, you're going to have 1 mana the next turn, so you're going to be still gimped. So even in a really best case scenario for this card is trash. Don't ever run this card in any deck, ever. Please. And now we move on to Corruption. Coming in at number 5, where are you, my friend? The Undead Hydra. This creature is interesting, but unfortunately it's just too much mana. It is in fact the only creature in the game that costs 5 mana. I cannot imagine any reason why this creature costs 5 mana. Is it really powerful? No. It has 1 speed. Yeah, 5/5 unstoppable, that's pretty cool, I guess. But again, it has 1 speed. You have cards like... Oh my god. This is still happening? That's really lame. Whatever. You have cards with 3 aspects and 2 mana, like Fae of Charm, like Treant, like Necromantic Cult, that are more powerful than this. And this costs 5 mana. Why in the world is this card 5 mana? Basically, this card needs to cost 4 mana. If it was 4 mana and 2 aspects, it would actually be a decent play, because it would be a nice curved follow-up after a Zombie Giant. Right now, the cost is the same as a Dread Knight. Dread Knight's a lot better than this card, and even that isn't really being played. So Undead Hydra, sorry, 5 mana? If I'm paying 5 mana for a creature, it has to be like Red Dragon. And Red Dragon costs 4 mana, and is unimaginably more powerful than this card. So, now, this just needs to cost 4 mana, and in that case, you know, Mono Corruption might actually run this card at 4 mana, as just like a closer, because a 5/5 unstoppable is kind of difficult to deal with. But only if you already have board control, because with 1 speed, all it's going is going face, and it's not gonna be able to attack anything, really. Shame, I would like to run this card in my deck. Look at this art! This thing has like 6 heads! Oh man, it reminds me of a creature from Dark Souls. Unfortunately, that creature was very easy to kill. Maybe that's why this card is so poor. Word of Pain comes in at number 4, another one of the word cards. Now this card, well, it's kind of like Word of Grace, but you get less life. Well, but you steal some life from your opponent, I guess. But that's just not very good. I guess if you're at 4 aspects and you steal 4 life, that's kind of decent. But it just isn't really doing much. It's not really good early, and late game is just alright. It just doesn't do enough. I kind of wish that Consume Spirit was the Word of Pain, but if Consume Spirit drew you a card, it would be like bonkers broken in every possible way. So instead we get Word of Pain, and it is a very painful card indeed. It's just not too good. Stealing a little bit of life isn't enough to really tilt the balance. Succubus already does that while providing you with a 3/3 flyer, so nah. Word of Pain, one of the worst cards for sure. Probably not as bad as Word of Power because it's actually playable, but nah, not much good. Coming in at number 3, Midnight Feast. This card was recently improved to cost only 2 mana instead of 3. At 3 mana it was completely useless. At 2 mana it's not a lot better, but at least it's something. I like to compare this card to Word of Vigor. Let's see, they both cost 2 mana in one aspect. Okay. Word of Vigor is an instant. Midnight Feast is not. Word of Vigor puts the emblems on any creature. Doesn't have to be elves. Midnight Feast, it's only zombies. Word of Vigor draws you a card. Midnight Feast does not draw you a card. Word of Vigor doesn't have any prerequisites. Midnight Feast has a prerequisite. Now, admittedly, with Midnight Feast, you could actually get 3 emblems with one aspect. Yeah, if your opponent has 3 creatures in the graveyard somehow. But it's not quite there. This card could be decent if it was buffed again. Either by making it an instant, or I don't know. I think not requiring the creatures in the graveyard might make it a little bit too powerful. Just make it an instant. Give Corruption an instant card, and this would be an interesting one. I also kind of wish you didn't have to power up only zombies, because it's just kind of annoying because you don't really run that many zombies. You run a few, but by basically making it zombies, you're forcing it to only go into that one specific deck. And why should it be forced to one specific deck? Anyways, coming in at number 2, Nightbringer, the 1 mana demon. Basically, it's a card you have no reason to ever put into any deck. The only reason the Dark Portal decks used it because it was the only 1 costing demon, and you could search for it and just play it for 0, and that was alright, but all it ever did was serve as cannon fodder. The effect doesn't do anything. Milling your opponent's cards, like, why would you even do that? In a mill deck, it's not too good either because it's just too weak. This card just doesn't seem to have a home. Maybe if demons had more synergy. But even then, I kind of hope demons get a better 1-drop than this. And now the worst corruption card. Dreadful Nightmares. What an appropriate name. Basically, this card doesn't do anything at all. Yes, you can put something on the top of your deck and then put a few cards in the graveyard. Whoop-de-doo, I guess. But so what? It has no effect on the board. It doesn't draw you a card or anything, so what's the point? The only use out of this card I've ever seen is very, very late game in a control matchup where you use it for a large amount of mana to mill like 7 cards from your opponent's deck to try to accelerate him losing by running out of cards. That's it. That is literally the only way to use this card. Real shame because it's a cool idea, but this card needs to draw you a card to be even remotely good. Now, that said, it would have to require you to at least pay maybe a minimum of 2 mana, so you can't just play it for 0 and draw a card. Pay a minimum of 2, look at the top 2, and then, you know, you draw a card and then put 1 on the bottom, put 1 on top, blah, blah, blah. Then it will be cool. Then I might consider running it. But as it is, the card is just Dreadful Nightmares. So that was it for the worst cards. Let's do a recap real quick. The 6 worst cards were... Oh, where are we at? Militia, the Grand Institute, Vegetation Blockade, Detonate, Word of Power, and Dreadful Nightmares. Now, I've gone ahead and arranged those in the order of best to worst. You know, I use the term best loosely. So anyways, of those 6 cards, the one I've chosen to be the least bad is Detonate, because it actually might do something. It is a counter to artifacts. You just play it, you destroy an artifact, you know, it's something. It has a purpose, it functions. And is in fact probably a cut above the rest of these. Number 5, I decided Grand Institute because again, you can actually get some function out of this card. If you're not strictly using 3 skills, you know, this is kind of like flexible, but But again, it's actually usable. So that's why it's only the 5th worst. Now we get into the really bad stuff. The 4th worst card in the game is Militia. Because it's a creature, but it's just a very small creature. It doesn't do much. But you can just play it on the board and, I don't know, maybe you use it to sacrifice it to a Bloodborne Prince or something. At least it does something, right? Even if it is very, very, very little. The 3rd worst cards is Dreadful Nightmares. I put it as number 3 because of its late game application where it could actually win you the game. So you could use it as a tech card basically. So hey, it has a purpose. Even if it's extremely fringe and extremely narrow, it has a purpose. Unlike the next 2 cards, the 2nd worst card is Vegetation Blockade. Just because If you don't play it on turn 3, it's completely useless. If you play it on turn 3, it's mostly pretty bad. So best case scenario for this card is mostly pretty bad. Yeah, that's not good. That's not good at all. And the worst card in the game, Word of Power. I can't even imagine any way you use this card. If you're looking for some kind of big mana spikes, use the Hero Power. It is infinitely better for that purpose than Word of Power. Destroying your own mana crystals is just stupid. And you don't gain nearly enough mana for doing this. Based on your Dominion levels, why would you ever want more than 2 Dominion levels? And even on 3, even on 4 Dominion levels, if for some ungodly reason you're using 4 Dominion levels, yeah, you get a nice mana boost, but what exactly are you going to do with it? What couldn't you play that you can play with this card, especially because Basic Despina lets you do so much more. Basic Despina can give you like 6 mana with no cost at all. Word of Power is, in my opinion, the worst card in Spellweaver. It's a card I would never, ever even consider activating. Because, my goodness, it's just, it does you more harm than good. Literally, it's like a spark that takes away mana next turn. How lovely is that? Ooh, alright, so that was an adventure into the very worst cards of Spellweaver. Next, I will talk about the best cards, but I'm not going to order those because that would be very difficult to do. Because some cards, you know, all the best cards are really good because they function for their decks, so you can't really just, you can't really order them up. Unless I get really inspired and decide to do so. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the parade of the very worst that Spellweaver has to offer. And like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video.